Chapter 11. The makings were neatly laid out on a side table, and to pour into a glass an inch or so of the raw spirit and shoosh some soda water on top of it was with me the work of a moment. This done, I retired to an armchair and put my feet up, sipping the mixture with carefree enjoyment, rather like Caesar having one in his tent the day he overcame the Nervi. As I let the mind dwell on what must even now be taking place in that peaceful garden, I felt bucked and uplifted. Though never for an instant faltering in my opinion that Augustus Fink-Nottle was nature's final word in cloth-headed guffins, I liked the man and wished him well, and could not have felt more deeply involved in the success of his wooing if I, and not he, had been under the ether. The thought that by this time he might quite easily have completed the preliminary pourparlers and be deep in an informal discussion of honeymoon plans was very pleasant to me. Of course, considering the sort of girl Madeleine Basset was, stars and rabbits and all that, I mean, you might say that a sober sadness would have been more fitting. But in these matters you have to realize that tastes differ. The impulse of right-thinking men might be to run a mile when they saw the Basset, but for some reason she appealed to the deeps in Gussie, so that was that. I had reached this point in my meditations when I was aroused by the sound of the door opening. Somebody came in and started moving like a leopard toward the side table, and lowering the feet, I perceived that it was Tuppy Glossop. The sight of him gave me a momentary twinge of remorse, reminding me, as it did, that in the excitement of getting Gussie fixed up, I had rather forgotten about this other client. It was often that way when you're trying to run two cases at once. However, Gussie now being off my mind, I was prepared to devote my whole attention to the Glossop problem. I had been much pleased by the way he had carried out the task assigned him at the dinner-table. No easy one, I can assure you, for the browsing and sluicing had been of the highest quality, and there had been one dish in particular, I allude to the nonettes de poulet agnée sorel, which might well have broken down the most iron resolution. But he had passed it up like a professional fasting man, and I was proud of him. "Oh, hello, Tuppy," I said. "I wanted to see you." He turned, snifter in hand, and it was easy to see that his privations had tried him sorely. He was looking like a wolf on the steppes of Russia, which has seen its peasant shin up a high tree. "Yes," he said rather unpleasantly. "Well, here I am." "Well? What do you mean, well?" "Make your report." "What report?" "Have you nothing to tell me about Angela?" "Only that she's a blister." I was concerned. "Hasn't she come clustering round you yet?" "She has not." "Very odd." "Why odd?" "She must have noted your lack of appetite." He barked raspingly, as if he were having trouble with the tonsils of the soul. "Lack of appetite? I'm as hollow as the Grand Canyon." "Courage, Tuppy. Think of Gandhi." "What about Gandhi?" "He hasn't had a square meal for years." "Nor have I, or I could swear I hadn't. Gandhi my left foot." I saw that it might be best to let the Gandhi motif slide. I went back to where we had started. "She's probably looking for you now." "Who is? Angela?" "Yes. She must have noticed your supreme sacrifice." "I don't suppose she noticed it at all, the little fathead. I'll bet it didn't register in any way whatsoever." "Come, Tuppy," I urged. "This is morbid. Don't take this gloomy view. She must have at least have spotted that you refused those nonettes de poulet agnée sorel. It was a sensational renunciation and stuck out like a sore thumb. And the sapé à la Rossini—" A hoarse cry broke from his twisted lips. "Will you stop it, Bertie? Do you think I'm made of marble? Isn't it bad enough to have sat watching one of Anatole's supremest dinners flit by, course after course, without having you making a song about it? Don't remind me of those nonettes. I can't stand it." I endeavored to hearten and console. "Be brave, Tuppy. Fix your thoughts on that cold steak and kidney pie in the larder. As the good book says, it cometh in the morning." "Yes, in the morning. And it's now 9:30 at night." You would bring that pie up, wouldn't you? Just when I was trying to keep my mind off it." I saw what he meant. Hours must pass before he could dig into that pie. I dropped the subject, and we sat for a pretty good time in silence. Then he rose and began to pace the room in an overwrought sort of way, like a zoo lion who has heard the dinner gong go and is hoping the keeper won't forget him in the general distribution. I averted my gaze tactfully, but I could hear him kicking chairs and things. It was plain that the man's soul was in travail and his blood pressure high. Presently he returned to his seat, and I saw that he was looking at me intently. There was that about his demeanour that led me to think that he had something to communicate. Nor was I wrong. He tapped me significantly on the knee and spoke. "Bertie?" "Hello." "Shall I tell you something?" "Certainly, old bird," I said cordially. "I was just beginning to feel that the scene could do with a bit more dialogue." "This business of Angela and me?" "Yes." "I've been putting in a lot of solid thought about it." "Oh, yes?" "I have analyzed the situation pitilessly, and one thing stands out as clear as dammit. There has been dirty work afoot." "I don't get you." "All right, let me review the facts. Up to the time she went to Cannes, Angela loved me. She was all over me. I was the blue-eyed boy in every sense of the term. You'll admit that." "Indisputably." "And directly she came back we had this bust-up." "Quite." "About nothing." "Oh, dash it, old man, nothing? You were a bit tactless, what, about her shark?" "I was frank and candid about her shark, and that's my point. Do you seriously believe that a trifling disagreement about sharks would have made a girl hand a man his hat, if her heart were really his?" "Certainly. It beats me why he couldn't see it. But then poor old Tuppy has never been very hot on the finer shades. He's one of those large, tough, football-playing blokes who lack the more delicate sensibilities, as I've heard Jeeves call them. Excellent at blocking a punt or walking across an opponent's face in cleated boots, but not so good when it comes to understanding the high-strung female temperament. It simply wouldn't occur to him that a girl might be prepared to give up her life's happiness rather than waive her shark." "Rot. It was just pretext." "What was?" "This shark business. She wanted to get rid of me and grabbed at the first excuse." "No, no." "I tell you she did." "What on earth would she want to get rid of you for?" "Exactly. That's the very question I asked myself. And here's the answer. Because she has fallen in love with somebody else. It sticks out a mile. There's no other possible solution. She goes to Cannes all for me. She comes back all off me. Obviously, during those 2 months, she must have transferred her affections to some foul blister she met out there." "No, no." "Don't keep saying no, no. She must have done. Well, I'll tell you one thing, and you can take this as official. If I ever find this slimy, slithery snake in the grass, he had better make all the necessary arrangements at his favorite nursing home without delay, because I'm going to be very rough with him. I propose, if and when found, to take him by his beastly neck, shake him till he froths, and pull him inside out and make him swallow himself." With which words he biffed off, and I, having given him a minute or two to get out of the way, rose and made for the drawing-room. The tendency of females to roost in drawing-rooms after dinner being well marked, I expected to find Angela there. It was my intention to have a word with Angela. To Tuppy's theory that some insinuating bird had stolen the girl's heart from him at Cannes, I had given, as I have indicated, little credence, considering it the mere unbalanced applesauce of a bereaved man. It was, of course, the shark, and nothing but the shark, that had caused love's young dream to go temporarily off the boil, and I was convinced that a word or two with a cousin at this juncture would set everything right. For frankly, I thought it incredible that a girl of her natural sweetness and tender-heartedness should not have been moved to her foundations by what she had seen at dinner that night. Even Seppings, Aunt Dahlia's butler, a cold, unemotional man, had gasped and practically reeled when Tuppy waved aside those nonettes de poulet agne sorel, while the footman, standing by with the potatoes, had stared like one seeing a vision. I simply refused to consider the possibility of the significance of the thing having been lost on a nice girl like Angela. I fully expected to find her in the drawing-room with her heart bleeding freely, all ripe for an immediate reconciliation. In the drawing-room, however, when I entered, only Aunt Dahlia met the eye. It seemed to me that she gave me a rather jaundiced look as I hove in sight, but this, having so recently beheld Tuppy in his agony, I attributed to the fact that she, like him, had been going light on the menu. You can't expect an empty aunt to beam like a full aunt. "Oh, it's you, is it?" she said. Well, of course it was. "Where's Angela?" I asked. "Gone to bed." "Already?" "She said she had a headache." I wasn't so sure I liked the sound of that so much. A girl who has observed the sundered lover sensationally off his feed does not go to bed with headaches if love has been reborn in her heart. She sticks around and gives him the swift, remorseful glance from beneath the drooping eyelashes, and generally endeavours to convey to him that if he wants to get together across a round table and try to find a formula, she is all for it too. Yes, I am bound to say I found that going-to-bed stuff a bit disquieting. "Gone to bed, eh?" I murmured musingly. "What did you want her for?" "I thought she might like a stroll and a chat." "Are you going for a stroll?" said Aunt Dahlia with a sudden show of interest. "Where?" "Oh, hither and thither. Then I wonder if you would mind doing something for me." "Give it a name." "It won't take you long. You know that path that runs past the greenhouses into the kitchen garden? If you go along it, you come to a pond." "That's right." "Well, will you get a good stout piece of rope or cord and go down on that path till you come to the pond?" "To the pond, right." "And look about till you find a nice heavy stone. Or a fairly large brick will do." "I see," I said, although I didn't, being still fogged. "Stone or brick, yes, and then?" "Then," said the relative, "I want you, like a good boy, to fasten the rope to the brick and tie it around your damned neck and jump into the pond and drown yourself. In a few days I will send and have you fished up and buried, because I shall need to dance on your grave." I was more fogged than ever, and not only fogged, wounded and resentful. I remember reading a book where a girl suddenly fled from the room, afraid to stay for fear dreadful things would come tumbling from her lips, determined that she would not remain another day in this house to be insulted and misunderstood. I felt much about the same. Then I reminded myself that one has got to make allowances for a woman with only about half a spoonful of soup inside her, and I checked the red-hot crack that rose to the lips. "What," I said gently, "is this all about? You seem pipped with Bertram." "Pipped?" "Noticeably pipped. Why all this ill-concealed animus?" A sudden flame shot from her eyes, singeing my hair. "Who was the ass? Who was the chump? Who was the dithering idiot who talked me, against my better judgment, into going without my dinner? I might have guessed." I saw that I had divined correctly the cause of her strange mood. "It's all right, Aunt Dahlia. I know just how you are feeling. A bit on the hollow side, what? But the agony will pass. If I were you, I'd sneak down and raid the larder after the household have gone to bed. I am told there's a pretty good steak and kidney pie there which will repay inspection." "Have faith, Aunt Dahlia," I urged. "Pretty soon Uncle Tom will be along, full of sympathy and anxious inquiries." "Will he? Do you know where he is now?" "I haven't seen him." "He is in his study, with his face buried in his hands, muttering about civilization and melting pots." "Eh? Why?" "Because it has been my painful duty to inform him that Anatole has given notice." I own that I reeled. "What?" "Given notice. As the result of that drivelling scheme of yours. What did you expect a sensitive, temperamental French cook to do, if you went about urging everybody to refuse all food? I hear that when the first 2 courses came back to the kitchen practically untouched, his feelings were so hurt that he cried like a child. And when the rest of the dinner followed, he came to the conclusion that the whole thing was a studied and calculated insult, and decided to hand in his portfolio. Golly! You may well say golly. Anatole, God's gift to the gastric juices, gone like the dew off the petal of a rose, and all through your idiocy. Perhaps you'll understand now why I want you to go and jump in that pond. I might have known that some hideous disaster would strike this house like a thunderbolt if once you wriggled your way into it and started trying to be clever. Harsh words, of course, as from aunt to nephew, but I bore her no resentment. No doubt, if you looked at it from a certain angle, Bertram might be considered to have made something of a floater. I am sorry. What's the good of being sorry? I acted for what I deemed the best. Another time try acting for the worst. Then we may possibly escape with a mere flesh wound. Uncle Tom's not feeling too bucked about it all, you say? He's groaning like a lost soul, and any chance I ever had of getting that money out of him has gone. I stroked the chin thoughtfully. There was, I had to admit, reason in what she said. None knew better than I how terrible a blow the passing of Anatole would be to Uncle Tom. I have stated earlier in this chronicle that this curious object of the seashore with whom Aunt Dahlia has linked her lot is a bloke who habitually looks like a pterodactyl that has suffered, and the reason he does so is that all those years he spent in making millions in the Far East put his digestion on the blink, and the only cook that has ever been discovered capable of pushing food into him without starting something like Old Home Week in Moscow under the third waistcoat button is this uniquely gifted Anatole. Deprived of Anatole's services, all he was likely to give the wife of his bee was a dirty look. Yes, unquestionably, things seem to have struck a somewhat rocky patch, and I must admit that I found myself, at moment of going to press, a little destitute of constructive ideas. Confident, however, that these would come ere long, I kept the stiff upper lip. Bad, I conceded. Quite bad, beyond a doubt. Certainly a nasty jar for one and all. But have no fear, Aunt Dahlia, I will fix everything. I have alluded earlier to the difficulty of staggering when you're sitting down, showing that it is a feat of which I, personally, am not capable. Aunt Dahlia, to my amazement, now did it apparently without an effort. She was well wedged into a deep arm-chair, but nevertheless she staggered like a billy-o. A sort of spasm of horror and apprehension contorted her face. If you dare to try any more of your lunatic schemes— I saw that it would be fruitless to try to reason with her. Quite plainly she was not in the vein. Contenting myself, accordingly, with a gesture of loving sympathy, I left the room. Whether she did or did not throw a handsomely bound volume of the works of Alfred, Lord Tennyson, at me, I am not in a position to say. I had seen it lying on the table beside her, and as I closed the door I remember receiving the impression that some blunt instrument had crashed against the woodwork, but I was feeling too preoccupied to note and observe. I blame myself for not having taken into consideration the possible effects of a sudden abstinence on the part of virtually the whole strength of the company on one of Anatole's impulsive Provençal temperament. These Gauls, I should have remembered, can't take it. Their tendency to fly off the handle at the slightest provocation is well known. No doubt the man put his whole soul into those nonettes de poulet, and to see them come homing back to him must have gashed him like a knife. However, spilt milk blows nobody any good, and it's useless to dwell upon it. The task now confronting Bertram was to put matters right, and I was pacing the lawn, pondering to this end, when I suddenly heard a groan so lost soulish that I thought it must have proceeded from Uncle Tom, escaped from captivity, and come to groan in the garden. Looking about me, however, I could discern no uncles. Puzzled, I was about to resume my meditations when the sound came again, and peering into the shadows, I observed a dim form seated on one of the rustic benches which so liberally dotted this pleasance, and another dim form standing beside same. A second and more penetrating glance, and I had assembled the facts. These dim forms were, in the order named, Gussie Fink-Nottle and Jeeves. And what Gussie was doing, groaning all over the place like this, was more than I could understand. Because, I mean to say, there was no possibility of error. He wasn't singing. As I approached, he gave an encore, and it was beyond question a groan. Moreover, I could now see him clearly, and his whole aspect was definitely sandbagged. "Good evening, sir," said Jeeves. "Mr. Fink-Nottle is not feeling well." Nor was I. Gussie had begun to make a low, bubbling noise, and I could no longer disguise it from myself that something must have gone seriously wrong with the works. I mean, I know marriage is a pretty solemn business, and the realization that he is in for it frequently churns a chap up a bit, but I'd never come across a case of a newly engaged man taking it on the chin so completely as this. Gussie looked up. His eye was dull. He clutched the thatch. "Good-bye, Bertie," he said, rising. I seemed to spot an error. "You mean hello, don't you?" "No, I don't. I mean good-bye. I'm off." "Off where?" "To the kitchen garden, to drown myself." "Don't be an ass." "I'm not an ass. Am I an ass, Jeeves?" "Possibly a little injudicious, sir." "Drowning myself, you mean?" "Yes, sir." "You think on the whole not drown myself?" "I should not advocate it, sir." "Very well, Jeeves. I accept your ruling. After all, it would be unpleasant for Mrs. Travers to find a swollen body floating in her pond." "Yes, sir." "And she has been very kind to me." "Yes, sir." "And you have been very kind to me, Jeeves." "Thank you, sir." "So have you, Bertie. Very kind. Everybody has been very kind to me. Very, very kind. Very kind indeed. I have no complaints to make. All right, I'll go for a walk instead." I followed him with bulging eyes as he tottered off into the dark. "Jeeves," I said, and I am free to admit that in my emotion I bleated like a lamb drawing itself to the attention of the parent sheep, "what the dickens is all this?" "Mr. Fink-Nottle is not quite himself, sir. He has passed through a trying experience." I endeavored to put together a brief synopsis of previous events. "I left him out here with Miss Basset." "Yes, sir." "I had softened her up." "Yes, sir." "He knew exactly what he had to do. I had coached him thoroughly in lines and business." "Yes, sir, so Mr. Fink-Nottle informed me." "Well, then?" "I regret to say, sir, there was a slight hitch." "You mean something went wrong?" "Yes, sir." I could not fathom. The brain seemed to be tottering on its throne. "But how could anything go wrong? She loves him, Jeeves." "Indeed, sir?" "She definitely told me so. All he had to do was propose." "Yes, sir." "Well, didn't he?" "No, sir." "Then what the dickens did he talk about?" "Newts, sir." "Newts?" "Yes, sir." "Newts?" "Yes, sir." "But why did he want to talk about newts?" "He did not want to talk about newts, sir. As I gather from Mr. Fink-Nottle, nothing could have been more alien to his plans." I simply couldn't grasp the trend. "But you can't force a man to talk about newts." "Mr. Fink-Nottle was the victim of a sudden unfortunate spasm of nervousness, sir. Upon finding himself alone with a young lady, he admits to having lost his morale. In such circumstances, gentlemen frequently talk at random, saying the first thing that chances to enter their heads. This, in Mr. Fink-Nottle's case, would seem to have been the newt, its treatment in sickness and in health." The scales fell from my eyes. I understood. I had had the same sort of thing happen to me in moments of crisis. I remember once detaining a dentist with a drill at one of my lower bicuspids and holding him up for nearly 10 minutes with a story about a Scotchman, an Irishman, and a Jew. Purely automatic. The more he tried to jab, the more I said, "Hootsman, begorra," and "Oi, oi." When one loses one's nerve, one simply babbles. I could put myself in Gussie's place. I could envisage the scene. There he and the Basset were, alone together in the evening stillness. No doubt, as I had advised, he had shot the works about sunsets and fairy princesses and so forth, and then had arrived at the point where he had to say that bit about having something to say to her. At this, I take it, she lowered her eyes and said, "Oh, yes." He then, I should imagine, said it was something very important, to which her response would, one assumes, have been something on the lines of "Really?" or "Indeed?" or possibly just the sharp intake of the breath. And then their eyes met, just as mine met the dentist's, and something suddenly seemed to catch him in the pit of the stomach, and everything went black, and he heard his voice starting to drool about newts. Yes, I could follow the psychology. Nevertheless, I found myself blaming Gussie. On discovering that he was stressing the newt note in this manner, he ought, of course, to have tuned out, even if it had meant sitting there saying nothing. No matter how much of a twitter he was in, he should have had sense enough to see that he was throwing a spanner into the works. No girl, when she has been led to expect that a man is about to pour forth his soul in a fervour of passion, likes to find him suddenly shelving the whole topic in favour of an address on aquatic salamandridae. Bad Jeeves. Yes, sir. And how long did this nuisance continue? For some not inconsiderable time, I gather, sir. According to Mr. Fink-Nottle, he supplied Miss Basset with very full and complete information, not only with respect to the common newt, but also the crested and palmated varieties. He described to her how newts, during the breeding season, live in the water, subsisting upon tadpoles, insect larvae, and crustaceans, how later they make their way to the land and eat slugs and worms, and how the newly born newt has 3 pairs of long, plum-like external gills. And he was just observing that newts differ from salamanders in the shape of the tail, which is compressed, and that a marked sexual dimorphism prevails in most species, when the young lady rose and said that she thought she would go back to the house. And then she went, sir. I stood musing. More and more it was beginning to be borne in upon me what a particularly difficult chap Gussie was to help. He seemed to so marked an extent to lack snap and finish. With infinite toil you manoeuvred him into a position where all he had to do was charge ahead, and he didn't charge ahead, but went off sideways, missing the objective completely. Difficult, Jeeves? Yes, sir. In happier circs, of course, I would have canvassed his views on the matter, but after what had occurred in connection with that mess jacket, my lips were sealed. Well, I must think it over. Yes, sir. Burnish the brain a bit and endeavour to find the way out. Yes, sir. Well, good night, Jeeves. Good night, sir. He shimmered off, leaving a pensive Bertram Wooster standing motionless in the shadows. It seemed to me that it was hard to know what to do for the best. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. I don't know if it has happened to you at all, but a thing I've noticed with myself is that, when I'm confronted by a problem which seems for the moment to stump and baffle, a good sleep will often bring the solution in the morning. It was so on the present occasion. The nibs who study these matters claim, I believe, that this has got something to do with the subconscious mind, and very possibly they may be right. I wouldn't have said offhand that I had a subconscious mind, but I suppose I must without knowing it, and no doubt it was there, sweating away diligently at the old stand, all the while the corporeal Wooster was getting the 8 hours. For directly I opened my eyes on the morrow, I saw daylight. Well, I don't mean that exactly, because naturally I did. What I mean is that I found I had the thing all mapped out. The good old subconscious M had delivered the goods, and I perceived exactly what steps must be taken in order to put Augustus Fink-Nottle among the practising Romeos. I should like you, if you can spare me a moment of your valuable time, to throw your mind back to that conversation he and I had had in the garden on the previous evening. Not the glimmering landscape bit, I don't mean that, but the concluding passages of it. Having done so, you will recall that when he informed me that he had never touched alcoholic liquor, I shook the head a bit, feeling that this must inevitably weaken him as a force where proposing to girls was concerned. And events had shown that my fears were well founded. Put to the test, with nothing but orange juice inside him, he had proved a complete bust. In a situation calling for words of molten passion of a nature calculated to go through Madeleine Basset like a red-hot gimlet through a half a pound of butter, he had said not a syllable that could bring a blush to the cheek of modesty, merely delivering a well-phrased, but, in the circumstances, quite misplaced lecture on newts. A romantic girl is not to be won by such tactics. Obviously, before attempting to proceed further, Augustus Fink-Nottle must be induced to throw off the shackling inhibitions of the past and fuel up. It must be a primed, confident Fink-Nottle who squared up to the Basset for round 2. Only so could the Morning Post make its 10 bob, or whatever it is, for printing the announcement of the forthcoming nuptials. Having arrived at this conclusion, I found the rest easy, and by the time Jeeves brought me my tea, I had evolved a plan complete in every detail. This I was about to place before him. Indeed, I had got as far as the preliminary, "I say, Jeeves," when we were interrupted by the arrival of Tuppy. He came listlessly into the room, and I was pained to observe that a night's rest had effected no improvement in the unhappy wreck's appearance. Indeed, I should have said, if anything, that he was looking rather more moth-eaten than when I had seen him last. If you can visualize a bulldog which has just been kicked in the ribs and had its dinner sneaked by the cat, you will have Hildebrand Glossop as he now stood before me. "Stop my vitals, Tuppy, old corpse," I said, concerned. "You're looking pretty blue around the rims." Jeeves slid from the presence in that tactful, eel-like way of his, and I motioned the remains to take a seat. "What's the matter?" I said. He came to anchor on the bed, and for a while sat picking at the coverlet in silence. "I've been through hell, Bertie." "Through where?" "Hell." "Oh, hell! And what took you there?" Once more he became silent, staring before him with sombre eyes. Following the gaze, I saw that he was looking at an enlarged photograph of my Uncle Tom in some sort of Masonic uniform which stood on the mantelpiece. I've tried to reason with Aunt Dahlia about this photograph for years, placing before her 2 alternative suggestions. A, to burn the beastly thing, or B, if she must preserve it, to shove me in another room when I come to stay. But she declines to accede. She says it's good for me. A useful discipline, she maintains, teaching me that there is a darker side to life, and that we were not put into this world for pleasure only. "Turn it to the wall if it hurts you, Tuppy," I said gently. "Eh?" "That photograph of Uncle Tom as the bandmaster." "I didn't come here to talk about photographs. I came for sympathy." "And you shall have it. What's the trouble? Worrying about Angela, I suppose? Well, have no fear. I have another well-laid plan for encompassing that young shrimp. I'll guarantee that she will be weeping on your neck before yonder sun has set." He barked sharply. "A fat chance!" "Tushy." "Eh?" "I mean tush, Tuppy. I tell you I will do it. I was just going to describe this plan of mine to Jeeves when you came in. Care to hear it?" "I don't want to hear any of your beastly plans. Plans are no good. She's gone and fallen in love with this other bloke, and now hates my gizzard." "Rot." "It isn't rot. I tell you, Tuppy, as one who can read the female heart, that this Angela loves you still." "Well, it didn't look like it much in the larder last night." "Oh, you went to the larder last night?" "I did." "And Angela was there?" "She was." "And your aunt?" "Also your uncle." I saw that I should require footnotes. All this was new stuff to me. I had stayed at Brinkley Court quite a lot in my time, but I had no idea the larder was such a social vortex. More like a snack bar on a race course than anything else, it seemed to have become. "Tell me the whole story in your own words," I said, omitting no detail, however apparently slight, for one never knows how important the most trivial detail may be. He inspected the photograph for a moment, with growing gloom. "All right," he said. "This is what happened. You know my views about that steak and kidney pie." "Quite." "Well, round about 1 a.m. I thought the time was ripe. I stole from my room and went downstairs. The pie seemed to beckon me. I nodded. I know how pies do. I got to the larder. I fished it out. I set it on the table. I found knife and fork. I collected salt, mustard, and pepper. There were some cold potatoes. I added those. I was about to pitch in when I heard a sound behind me, and there was your aunt at the door, in a blue and yellow dressing gown. Embarrassing. Most. I suppose you didn't know where to look. I looked at Angela. She came in with my aunt? No, with your uncle a minute or two later. He was wearing mauve pajamas and carried a pistol. Have you ever seen your uncle in pajamas and a pistol? Never. You haven't missed much. Tell me, Tuppy, I asked, for I was anxious to ascertain this, about Angela. Was there any momentary softening in her gaze as she fixed it on you? She didn't fix it on me. She fixed it on the pie. Did she say anything? Not right away. Your uncle was the first to speak. He said to your aunt, "God bless my soul, Dahlia, what are you doing here?" To which she replied, "Well, if it comes to that, my merry somnambulist, what are you?" Your uncle then said that he thought there must be burglars in the house, as he had heard noises. I nodded again. I could follow the trend. Ever since the scullery window was found open the year Shining Light was disqualified in the Caesarwich for boring, Uncle Tom has had a marked complex about burglars. I can still recall my emotions when, paying my first visit after he had bars put on all the windows, and attempting to thrust the head out in order to get a sniff of country air, I nearly fractured my skull on a sort of iron grill, as worn by the tougher kinds of medieval prison. "What sort of noises?" said your aunt. "Funny noises," said your uncle. Whereupon Angela, with a nasty, steely tinkle in her voice, the little buzzard, observed, "I expect it was Mr. Glossop eating." And then she did give me a look. It was the sort of wondering, revolted look a very spiritual woman would give a fat man gulping soup in a restaurant. The kind of look that makes a fellow feel he's 46 around the waist, and has great rolls of superfluous flesh pouring down over the back of his collar. And still speaking in the same unpleasant tone, she added, "I ought to have told you, father, that Mr. Glossop always likes to have a good meal 3 or 4 times during the night. It helps to keep him going till breakfast. He has the most amazing appetite. See, he has practically finished the large steak and kidney pie already." As he spoke these words, a feverish animation swept over Tuppy. His eyes glittered with a strange light, and he thumped the bed violently with his fist, nearly catching me a juicy one on the leg. That was what hurt, Bertie. That what was stung. I hadn't so much as started on that pie. But that's a woman all over. The eternal feminine. She continued her remarks. "You've no idea," she said, "how Mr. Glossop loves food. He just lives for it. He always eats 6 or 7 meals a day, and then starts in again after bedtime. I think it's rather wonderful." Your aunt seemed interested, and said it reminded her of a boa constrictor. Angela said, didn't she mean a python? And then they argued as to which of the two it was. Your uncle, meanwhile, poking about with that damned pistol of his till human life wasn't safe in the vicinity. And the pie lying there on the table, and me unable to touch it. You begin to understand why I said I had been through hell. Quite. Can't have been at all pleasant. Presently your aunt and Angela settled their discussion, deciding that Angela was right, and that it was a python that I reminded them of. And shortly after that we all pushed back to bed, Angela warning me in a motherly voice not to take the stairs too quickly. After 7 or 8 solid meals, she said, a man of my build ought to be very careful because of the danger of apoplectic fits. She said it was the same with dogs. When they became very fat and overfed, you had to see that they didn't hurry upstairs, as it made them puff and pant, and that was bad for their hearts. She asked your aunt if she remembered the late spaniel, Ambrose, and your aunt said, "Poor old Ambrose, you couldn't keep him away from the garbage pail." And Angela said, "Exactly, so do please be careful, Mr. Glossop." And you tell me she loves me still. I did my best to encourage. "Girlish banter, what?" "Girlish banter be dashed. She's right off me. Once her ideal, I am now less than the dust between her chariot wheels. She became infatuated with this chap, whoever he is, at Cannes, and now she can't stand the sight of me. My dear Tuppy, you are not showing your usual good sense in this Angela chap at Cannes matter. If you will forgive me saying so, you have got an idée fixe." "A what?" "An idée fixe. You know, one of those things fellows get. Like Uncle Tom's delusion, that everybody who is known even slightly to the police is lurking in the garden, waiting for a chance to break into the house. You keep talking about this chap at Cannes, and there never was a chap at Cannes, and I'll tell you why I'm so sure about this. During those 2 months on the Riviera, it so happens that Angela and I were practically inseparable. If there had been somebody nosing round her, I should have spotted it in a second." He started. I could see that this had impressed him. "Oh, she was with you all the time at Cannes, was she? I don't suppose she said 2 words to anybody else, except, of course, idle conf at the crowded dinner-table, or a chance remark in a throng at the casino?" "I see. You mean that anything in the shape of mixed bathing and moonlight strolls she conducted solely in your company?" "That's right. It was quite a joke at the hotel." "You must have enjoyed that." "Oh, rather. I've always been devoted to Angela." "Oh, yes?" "When we were kids, she used to call herself my little sweetheart." "She did?" "Absolutely." "I see." He sat plunged in thought, while I, glad to have set his mind at rest, proceeded with my tea. And presently there came the banging of a gong from the hall below, and he started like a war-horse at the sound of the bugle. "Breakfast," he said, and was off to a flying start, leaving me to brood and ponder. The more I brooded and pondered, the more did it seem to me that everything now looked pretty smooth. Tuppy, I could see, despite that painful scene in the larder, still loved Angela with all the old fervour. This meant that I could rely on that plan to which I had referred to bring home the bacon, and as I had found the way to straighten out the Gussie Basset difficulty, there seemed nothing more to worry about. It was with an uplifted heart that I addressed Jeeves as he came in to remove the tea-tray. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. "Jeeves," I said. "Sir?" "I have just been having a chat with young Tuppy, Jeeves. Did you happen to notice that he wasn't looking very roguish this morning?" "Yes, sir. It seems to me that Mr. Glossop's face was sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought." "Quite. He met my cousin Angela in the larder last night, and a rather painful interview ensued." "I am sorry, sir." "Not half so sorry as he was. She found him closeted with a steak and kidney pie, and appears to have been a bit caustic about fat men who lived for food alone." "Most disturbing, sir." "Very. In fact, many people would say that things had gone so far between these two, nothing now could bridge the chasm. A girl who would make cracks about human pythons who ate 9 or 10 meals a day, and ought to be careful not to hurry upstairs because of the danger of apoplectic fits, is a girl, many people would say, in whose heart love is dead. Wouldn't people say that, Jeeves?" "Undeniably, sir." "They would be wrong." "You think so, sir?" "I am convinced of it. I know these females. You can't go by what they say." "You feel that Miss Angela's strictures should not be taken too much au pied de la lettre, sir?" "Eh?" "In English we should say literally." "Literally. That's exactly what I mean. You know what girls are. A tiff occurs and they shoot their heads off. But underneath it all, the old love still remains. Am I correct? Quite correct, sir. The poet Scott— Right, Ho Jeeves. Very good, sir. And in order to bring that old love whizzing to the surface once more, all that is required is the proper treatment. By proper treatment, sir, you mean— Clever handling, Jeeves. A spot of the good old snaky work. I see what must be done to jerk my cousin Angela back to normalcy. I'll tell you, shall I? If you would be so kind, sir. I lit a cigarette and eyed him keenly through the smoke. He waited respectfully for me to unleash the words of wisdom. I must say for Jeeves that, till, as he is so apt to do, he starts shoving his oar in and cavilling and obstructing, he makes a very good audience. I don't know if he is actually agog, but he looks agog, and that's the great thing. Suppose you were strolling through the illimitable jungle, Jeeves, and happened to meet a tiger cub. The contingency is a remote one, sir. Never mind, let us suppose it. Very good, sir. Let us now suppose that you sloshed that tiger cub, and let us suppose further that word reached its mother that it was being put upon. What would you expect the attitude of that mother to be? In what frame of mind do you consider that tigress would approach you? I should anticipate a certain show of annoyance, sir. And rightly. Due to what is known as the maternal instinct, what? Yes, sir. Very good, Jeeves. We will now suppose that there has recently been some little coolness between this tiger cub and this tigress. For some days, let us say, they have not been on speaking terms. Do you think that would make any difference to the vim with which the latter would leap to the former's aid? No, sir. Exactly. Here, then, in brief, is my plan, Jeeves. I am going to draw my cousin Angela aside to a secluded spot and roast Tuppy properly. Roast, sir? Knock, slam, tick off, abuse, denounce. I shall be very terse about Tuppy, giving it as my opinion that in all essentials he is more like a warthog than an ex-member of a fine old English public school. What will ensue? Hearing him attacked, my cousin Angela's womanly heart will be as sick as mud. The maternal tigress in her will awake. No matter what differences they may have had, she will remember only that he is the man she loves and will leap to his defense. And from that to falling into his arms and burying the dead past will be but a step. How do you react to that? The idea is an ingenious one, sir. We Woosters are ingenious, Jeeves, exceedingly ingenious. Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I am not speaking without a knowledge of the form book. I have tested this theory. Indeed, sir. Yes, in person, and it works. I was standing on the Eden Rock at Antibes last month, idly watching the bathers disport themselves in the water, and a girl I knew slightly pointed at a male diver and asked me if I didn't think his legs were about the silliest-looking pair of props ever issued to a human being. I replied that I did indeed, and for the space of perhaps 2 minutes was extraordinarily witty and satirical about this bird's underpinning. At the end of that period, I suddenly felt as if I had been caught up in the tail of a cyclone. Beginning with a critique of my own limbs, which she said, justly enough, were nothing to write home about, this girl went on to dissect my manners, morals, intellect, general physique, and method of eating asparagus with such acerbity that by the time she had finished, the best you could say of Bertram was that, so far as was known, he had never actually committed murder or set fire to an orphan asylum. Subsequent investigation proved that she was engaged to the fellow with the legs, and had had a slight disagreement with him the evening before on the subject of whether he should or should not have made an original call of 2 spades, having 7 but without the ace. That night I saw them dining together with every indication of relish, their differences made up, and the love-light once more in their eyes. That shows you, Jeeves. Yes, sir. I expect precisely similar results from my cousin Angela when I start roasting Tuppy. By lunchtime, I should imagine, the engagement will be on again, and the diamond and platinum ring glittering as of yore on her 3rd finger. Or is it the 4th? Scarcely by lunchtime, sir. Miss Angela's maid informs me that Miss Angela drove off in her car early this morning with the intention of spending the day with friends in the vicinity. Well, within half an hour of whatever time she comes back, then. These are mere straws, Jeeves. Do not let us chop them. No, sir. The point is that as far as Tuppy and Angela are concerned, we may say with confidence that everything will shortly be hotsy-totsy once more. And what an agreeable thought that is, Jeeves. Very true, sir. If there is one thing that gives me the pip, it is two loving hearts being estranged. I can readily appreciate the fact, sir. I placed the stub of my gasper in the ashtray and lit another, to indicate that completed chap 1. Right-ho, then. So much for the Western Front. We now turn to the Eastern. Sir? I speak in parables, Jeeves. What I mean is, we now approach the matter of Gussie and Miss Basset. Yes, sir. Here, Jeeves, more direct methods are required. In handling the case of Augustus Fink-Nottle, we must keep always in mind the fact that we are dealing with a poop. A sensitive plant would perhaps be a kinder expression, sir. No, Jeeves, a poop. And with poops one has to employ the strong, forceful, straightforward policy. Psychology doesn't get you anywhere. You, if I may remind you without wounding your feelings, fell into the error of mucking about with psychology in connection with this Fink-Nottle, and the result was a washout. You attempted to push him over the line by rigging him out in a Mephistopheles costume and sending him off to a fancy-dress ball, your view being that scarlet tights would embolden him. Futile. The matter was never actually put to the test, sir. No, because he didn't get to the ball, and that strengthens my argument. A man who can set out in a cab for a fancy-dress ball and not get there is manifestly a poop of no common order. I don't think I have ever known anybody else who was such a dashed silly ass that he couldn't even get to a fancy-dress ball. Have you, Jeeves? No, sir. But don't forget this, because it is the point I wish above all to make. Even if Gussie had got to that ball, even if those scarlet tights, taken in conjunction with his horn-rimmed spectacles, hadn't given the girl a fit of some kind, even if she had rallied from the shock and he had been able to dance and generally hobnob with her, even then your efforts would have been fruitless, because, Mephistopheles costume or no Mephistopheles costume, Augustus Fink-Nottle would never have been able to summon up the courage to ask her to be his. All that would have resulted would be that she would have got that lecture on newts a few days earlier. And why, Jeeves? Shall I tell you why? Yes, sir. Because he would have been attempting the hopeless task of trying to do the thing on orange juice. Sir? Gussie is an orange juice addict. He drinks nothing else. I was not aware of that, sir. I have it from his own lips. Whether from some hereditary taint, or because he promised his mother he wouldn't, or simply because he doesn't like the taste of the stuff, Gussie Fink-Nottle has never in the whole course of his career pushed so much as the simplest gin and tonic over the larynx. And he expects, this poop expects, Jeeves, this wobbling, shrinking, diffident rabbit in human shape expects under these conditions to propose to the girl he loves. One hardly knows whether to smile or weep, what? You consider total abstinence a handicap to a gentleman who wishes to make a proposal of marriage, sir? The question amazed me. Why, dash it, I said, astounded. You must know it is. Use your intelligence, Jeeves. Reflect what proposing means. It means that a decent, self-respecting chap has got to listen to himself saying things which, if spoken on a silver screen, would cause him to dash to the box office and demand his money back. Let him attempt to do it on orange juice, and what ensues? Shame seals his lips, or if it doesn't do that, makes him lose his morale and start to babble. Gussie, for example, as we have seen, babbles of syncopated newts. Palmated newts, sir. Palmated or syncopated, it doesn't matter which. The point is that he babbles, and is going to babble again if he has another try at it. Unless, and this is where I want you to follow me very closely, Jeeves, unless steps are taken at once through the proper channels. Only active measures, promptly applied, can provide this poor, pusillanimous poop with the proper pep. And that is why, Jeeves, I intend tomorrow to secure a bottle of gin and lace his luncheon orange juice with it liberally." "Sir?" I clicked the tongue. "I have already had occasion, Jeeves," I said rebukingly, "to comment on the way you say 'well, sir,' and 'indeed, sir.' I take this opportunity of informing you that I object equally strongly to your 'sir,' pure and simple. The word seems to suggest that in your opinion I have made a statement or mooted a scheme so bizarre that your brain reels at it. In the present instance, there is absolutely nothing to say 'sir' about. The plan I have put forward is entirely reasonable and icily logical, and should excite no sirring whatsoever. Or don't you think so?" "Well, sir—" "Jeeves!" "I beg your pardon, sir. The expression escaped me inadvertently. What I intended to say, since you press me, was that the action which you propose does seem to me somewhat injudicious." "Injudicious? I don't follow you, Jeeves." "A certain amount of risk would enter into it, in my opinion, sir. It is not always a simple matter to gauge the effect of alcohol on a subject unaccustomed to such stimulants. I have known it to have distressing results in the case of parrots." "Parrots?" "I was thinking of an incident of my earlier life, sir, before I entered your employment. I was in the service of the late Lord Lancaster at the time, a gentleman who owned a parrot to which he was greatly devoted, and one day the bird chanced to be lethargic, and his lordship, with the kindly intention of restoring it to its customary animation, offered it a portion of seed cake steeped in the '84 port. The bird accepted the morsel gratefully, and consumed it with every indication of satisfaction. Almost immediately afterwards, however, its manner became markedly feverish. Having bitten its lordship in the thumb and sung part of a sea chanty, it fell to the bottom of the cage and remained there for a considerable period of time with its legs in the air, unable to move. I mention this, sir, in order to— I put my finger on the flaw. I had spotted it all along. But Gussie isn't a parrot." "No, sir, but—" "It is high time, in my opinion, that this question of what young Gussie really is was threshed out and cleared up. He seems to think he is a male newt, and you now appear to suggest that he is a parrot. The truth of the matter being that he is just a plain, ordinary poop and needs a snootful as badly as ever man did. So, no more discussion, Jeeves. My mind is made up. There is only one way of handling the difficult case, and that is the way I have outlined." "Very good, sir." "Right-o, Jeeves. So much for that, then. Now here's something else. You noticed that I said I was going to put this project through tomorrow, and no doubt you wondered why I said tomorrow. Why did I, Jeeves? Because you feel that if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly, sir?" "Partly, Jeeves, but not altogether. My chief reason for fixing the date as specified is that tomorrow, though you have doubtless forgotten, is the day of the distribution of prizes at Market Snodsbury Grammar School, at which, as you know, Gussie is to be the male star and master of the revels. So you see we shall, by lacing that juice, not only embolden him to propose to Miss Basset, but also put him so into shape that he will hold the Market Snodsbury audience spellbound." "In fact, you will be killing two birds with one stone, sir." "Exactly. A very neat way of putting it. Now, here is a minor point. On second thoughts, I think the best plan would be for you, not me, to lace the juice." "Sir?" "Jeeves!" "I beg your pardon, sir." "And I'll tell you why that would be the best plan. Because you are in a position to obtain ready access to the stuff. It is served to Gussie daily, I have noticed, in an individual jug. This jug will presumably be lying about the kitchen or somewhere before lunch tomorrow. It will be the simplest of tasks for you to slip a few fingers of gin in it." "No doubt, sir, but—" "Don't say but, Jeeves." "I fear, sir—" "I fear, sir, is just as bad. What I am endeavouring to say, sir, is that I am sorry, but I am afraid I must enter an unequivocal nolle prosequi." "Do what?" The expression is a legal one, sir, signifying the resolve not to proceed with a matter. In other words, Eager though I am to carry out your instructions, sir, as a general rule, in this occasion I must respectfully decline to cooperate." "You won't do it, you mean?" "Precisely, sir." I was stunned. I began to understand how a general must feel when he has ordered a regiment to charge and has been told that it isn't in the mood. "Jeeves," I said, "I had not expected this of you." "No, sir?" "No, indeed. Naturally, I realize that lacing Gussie's orange juice is not one of those regular duties for which you receive the monthly stipend, and if you care to stand on the strict letter of the contract, I suppose there is nothing to be done about it. But you will permit me to observe that this is scarcely the feudal spirit." "I am sorry, sir." "It is quite all right, Jeeves, quite all right. I am not angry, only a little hurt." "Very good, sir." "Right-ho, Jeeves." End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. Investigation proved that the friends Angela had gone to spend the day with were some stately homeowners of the name of Stretchley Budd, hanging out in a joint called Kingham Manor, about 8 miles distant in the direction of Pershire. I didn't know these birds, but their fascination must have been considerable, for she tore herself away from them only just in time to get back and dress for dinner. It was, accordingly, not until coffee had been consumed that I was able to get matters moving. I found her in the drawing-room, and at once proceeded to put things in train. It was with very different feelings from those which had animated the bosom when approaching the Basset 24 hours before in the same manner in this same drawing-room that I headed for where she sat. As I had told Tuppy, I had always been devoted to Angela, and there is nothing I like better than a ramble in her company, and I could see by the look of her now how sorely in need she was of my aid and comfort. Frankly, I was shocked by the unfortunate young prune's appearance. At Cannes she had been a happy, smiling English girl of the best type, full of beans and buck. Her face now was pale and drawn, like that of a hockey centre-forward at a girls' school who, in addition to getting a fruity one on the shin, had just been penalized for sticks. In any normal gathering her demeanour would have excited instant remark, but the standard of gloom at Brinkley Court had become so high that it passed unnoticed. Indeed, I shouldn't wonder if Uncle Tom, crouched in his corner waiting for the end, didn't think she was looking indecently cheerful. I got down to the agenda in my debonair way. "What ho, Angela, old girl?" "Hullo, Bertie, darling." "Glad you're back at last. I missed you." "Did you, darling?" "I did indeed. Care to come for a saunter?" "I'd love it." "Fine. I have much to say to you that is not for the public ear." I think at this moment poor old Tuppy must have got a sudden touch of cramp. He had been sitting hard by, staring at the ceiling, and he now gave a sharp leap like a gaffed salmon and upset a small table containing a vase, a bowl of potpourri, 2 china dogs, and a copy of Omar Khayyam bound in limp leather. Aunt Dahlia uttered a startled hunting cry. Uncle Tom, who probably imagined from the noise that this was civilization crashing at last, helped things along by breaking a coffee-cup. Tuppy said he was sorry. Aunt Dahlia, with a deathbed groan, said it didn't matter, and Angela, having stared haughtily for a moment like a princess of the old regime confronted by some notable example of gaucherie on the part of some particularly foul member of the underworld, accompanied me across the threshold. And presently I had deposited her and self on one of the rustic benches in the garden, and was ready to snap into the business of the evening. I considered it best, however, before doing so, to ease things along with a little informal chit-chat. You don't want to rush a delicate job like the one I had in hand. And so for a while we spoke of neutral topics. She said that what had kept her so long at the Stretchley Budds was that Hilda Stretchley Budd had made her stop on and help with the arrangements for her servants' ball tomorrow night, a task which she couldn't very well decline, as all the Brinkley Court domestic staff were to be present. I said that a jolly night's revelry might be just what was needed to cheer Anatole up and take his mind off things, to which she replied that Anatole wasn't going. On being urged to do so by Aunt Dahlia, she said he had merely shaken his head sadly and gone on talking of returning to Provence, where he was appreciated. It was after the sombre silence induced by this statement that Angela said that the grass was wet and she thought she would go in. This, of course, was entirely foreign to my policy. "No, don't do that. I haven't had a chance to talk to you since you arrived." "I shall ruin my shoes." "Put your feet up on my lap." "All right, and you can tickle my ankles." "Quite." Matters were accordingly arranged on these lines, and for some minutes we continued chatting in desultory fashion. Then the conversation petered out. I made a few observations, in re the scenic effects, featuring the twilight hush, the peeping stars, and the soft glimmer of the waters of the lake, and she said yes. Something rustled in the bushes in front of us, and I advanced the theory that it was possibly a weasel, and she said it might be, but it was plain that the girl was distrait, and I considered it best to waste no more time. "Well, old thing," I said, "I've heard all about your little dust-up. So those wedding bells are not going to ring out, what?" "No." "Definitely over, is it?" "Yes." "Well, if you want my opinion, I think that's a bit of goose for you, Angela, old girl. I think you're extremely well out of it. It's a mystery to me how you stood this Glossop so long. Take him for all in all, he ranks very low down among the wines and spirits. A washout, I should describe him as. A frightful oik, and a mass of side to boot. I'd pity the girl who is linked for life to a bargee like Tuppy Glossop." And I admitted a hard laugh, one of the sneering kind. "I always thought you were such friends," said Angela. I let go another hard one, with a bit more topspin on it than the first time. "Friends? Absolutely not. One was civil, of course, when one met the fellow, but it would be absurd to say one was a friend of his. A club acquaintance, and a mere one at that, and then one was at school with the man." "At Eton?" "Good heavens, no! We wouldn't have a fellow like that at Eton. At a kid's school before I went there. A grubby little brute he was, I recollect. Covered with ink and mire generally, washing only on alternate Thursdays. In short, a notable outsider shunned by all." I paused. I was more than a bit perturbed. Apart from the agony of having to talk in this fashion of one who, except when he was looping back rings and causing me to plunge into swimming baths in correct evening costume, had always been a very dear and esteemed crony, I didn't seem to be getting anywhere. Business was not resulting. Staring into the bushes without a yip, she appeared to be bearing these slurs and innuendos of mine with an easy calm. I had another pop at it. "Uncouth about sums it up. I doubt if I've ever seen an uncouther kid than this Glossop. Ask anyone who knew him in those days to describe him in a word, and the word they would use is uncouth. And he's just the same today. It's the old story. The boy is the father of the man." She appeared not to have heard. "The boy," I repeated, not wishing her to miss that one, "is the father of the man." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this Glossop." "I thought you said something about somebody's father." "I said the boy was the father of the man." "What boy?" "The boy Glossop." "He hasn't got a father." "I never said he had. I said he was the father of the boy, or rather of the man." "What man?" I saw that the conversation had reached a point where, unless care was taken, we should be muddled. "The point I am trying to make," I said, "is that the boy Glossop is the father of the man Glossop. In other words, each loathsome fault and blemish that led the boy Glossop to be frowned upon by his fellows is present in the man Glossop, and causes him, I am speaking now of the man Glossop, to be a hissing and a byword at places like the Drones, where a certain standard of decency is demanded from the inmates. Ask anyone at the Drones, and they will tell you that it was a black day for the dear old club when this chap Glossop somehow wriggled into the list of members. Here you will find a man who dislikes his face. There one who could stand his face if it wasn't for his habits. But the universal consensus of opinion is that the fellow is a bounder and a tick, and that the moment he showed signs of wanting to get into the place he should have been met with a firm nolle prosequi and heartily blackballed. I had to pause again here, partly in order to take in a spot of breath, and partly to wrestle with the almost physical torture of saying these frightful things about poor old Tuppy. "There are some chaps," I resumed, forcing myself once more to the nauseous task, "who, in spite of looking as if they had slept in their clothes, can get by quite nicely because they are amiable and suave. There are others who, for all that they excite adverse comment by being fat and uncouth, find themselves on the credit side of the ledger owing to their wit and sparkling humour. But this Glossop, I regret to say, falls into neither class. In addition to looking like one of those things that come out of hollow trees, he is universally admitted to be a dumb brick of the first water. No soul, no conversation. In short, any girl who, having been rash enough to get engaged to him, has managed at the 11th hour to slide out, is justly entitled to consider herself dashed lucky." I paused once more, and cocked an eye at Angela to see how the treatment was taking. All the while I had been speaking, she had sat gazing silently into the bushes, but it seemed to me incredible that she should not now turn on me like a tigress, according to specifications. It beat me why she hadn't done it already. It seemed to me that a mere tithe of what I had said, if said to a tigress about a tiger of which she was fond, would have made her, the tigress I mean, hit the ceiling, and the next moment you could have knocked me down with a toothpick. "Yes," she said, nodding thoughtfully, "you're quite right." "Eh?" "That's exactly what I've been thinking myself." "What?" "Dumb brick. It just describes him. One of the 6 silliest asses in England, I think he must be." I did not speak. I was endeavouring to adjust the faculties, which were in urgent need of a bit of first-aid treatment. I mean to say, all of this had come as a complete surprise. In formulating the well-laid plan which I had just been putting into effect, the one contingency I had not budgeted for was that she might adhere to the sentiments which I expressed. I had braced myself for a gush of stormy emotion. I was expecting the tearful ticking off, the girlish recriminations, and all the rest of the bag of tricks along those lines. But this cordial agreement with my remarks I had not foreseen, and it gave me what you might call pause for thought. She proceeded to develop her theme, speaking in ringing, enthusiastic tones, as if she loved the topic. Jeeves could tell you the word I want. I think it's ecstatic, unless that's the sort of rash you get on your face and have to use ointment for. But if that's the right word, then that's what her manner was as she ventilated the subject of poor old Tuppy. If you had been able to go simply by the sound of her voice, she might have been a court poet cutting loose about an oriental monarch, or Gussie Fink-Nottle describing his last consignment of newts. It's so nice, Bertie, talking to someone who really takes a sensible view about this man Glossop. Mother says he's a good chap, which is simply absurd. Anybody can see that he's absolutely impossible. He's conceited and opinionative, and argues all the time, even when he knows perfectly well that he's talking through his hat. And he smokes too much, and eats too much, and drinks too much, and I don't like the color of his hair. Not that he'll have any hair in a year or two, because he's pretty thin on top already, and before he knows where he is, he'll be as bald as an egg, and he's the last man who can afford to go bald. And I think it's simply disgusting the way he gorges all the time. Do you know I found him in the larder at 1 o'clock in the morning, absolutely wallowing in a steak and kidney pie? There was hardly any of it left, and you remember what an enormous dinner he had. Quite disgusting, I call it. But I can't stop out here all night, talking about men who aren't worth wasting a word on, and haven't even enough sense to tell sharks from flatfish. I'm going in." And, gathering about her slim shoulders the shawl which she had put on as a protection against the evening dew, she buzzed off, leaving me alone in the silent night. Well, as a matter of fact, not absolutely alone, because a few minutes later there was a sort of upheaval in the bushes in front of me, and Tuppy emerged. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. I gave him the eye. The evening had begun to draw in a bit by now, and the visibility, in consequence, was not so hot, but there still remained ample light to enable me to see him clearly. and what I saw convinced me that I should be a lot easier in my mind with a stout rustic bench between us. I rose accordingly, modelling my style on that of a rocketing pheasant, and proceeded to deposit myself on the other side of the object named. My prompt agility was not without its effect. He seemed somewhat taken aback. He came to a halt, and for about the space of time required to allow a bead of perspire to trickle from the top of the brow to the tip of the nose, stood gazing at me in silence. "So," he said at length, and it came as a complete surprise to me that fellows ever really do say "so." I had always thought it was just a thing you read in books, like quota, I mean to say, or odds bodikins, or even bagoom. Still, there it was. Quaint or not quaint, bizarre or not bizarre, he had said "so," and it was up to me to cope with the situation on those lines. It would have been a duller man than Bertie Wooster who had failed to note that the dear old chap was a bit steamed up. Whether his eyes were actually shooting forth flame I couldn't tell you, but there appeared to me to be a distinct incandescence. For the rest, his fists were clenched, his ears quivering, and the muscles of his jaw rotating rhythmically, as if he were making an early supper off something. His hair was full of twigs, and there was a beetle hanging to the side of his head, which would have interested Gussie Fink-Nottle. To this, however, I paid scant attention. There is a time for studying beetles and a time for not studying beetles. "So," he said again. Now those who know Bertie Wooster will best tell you that he is always at his shrewdest and most level-headed in moments of peril. Who was it who, when gripped by the arm of the law on boat-race night not so many years ago, and hauled off to Vine Street Police Station, assumed in a flash the identity of Eustace H. Plimsoll of the Laburnums, Allen Road, West Dulwich, thus saving the grand old name of Wooster from being dragged in the mire and avoiding wide publicity of the wrong sort? Who was it? But I need not labor the point. My record speaks for itself. 3 times pinched, but never once sentenced under the correct label. Ask anyone at the drones about this. So now, in a situation threatening to become every moment more scaly, I did not lose my head. I preserved the old sang-froid, smiling a genial and affectionate smile, and hoping that it wasn't too dark for it to register, I spoke with a jolly cordiality. "Why, hello, Tuppy, you here?" He said yes, he was here. "Been here long?" "I have." "Fine, I wanted to see you." "Well, here I am. Come out from behind that bench." "No thanks, old man, I like leaning on it. It seems to rest the spine." "In about 2 seconds," said Tuppy, "I'm going to kick your spine up through the top of your head." I raised the eyebrows. Not much good, of course, in that light, but it seemed to help the general composition. "Is this Hildebrand Glossop speaking?" I said. He replied that it was, adding that if I wanted to make sure, I might move a few feet over in his direction. He also called me an opprobrious name. I raised the eyebrows again. "Come, come, Tuppy, don't let this little chat become acrid. Is acrid the word I want?" "I couldn't say," he replied, beginning to sidle round the bench. I saw that anything I might wish to say must be said quickly. Already he had sidled some 6 feet, and though, by dint of sidling too, I had managed to keep the bench between us, who could predict how long this happy state of affairs would last? I came to the point, therefore. "I think I know what's on your mind, Tuppy," I said. "If you were in those bushes during my conversation with the recent Angela, I dare say you heard what I was saying about you." "I did." "I see. Well, we won't go into the ethics of the thing. Eavesdropping, some people might call it, and I can imagine stern critics drawing in the breath to some extent. Considering it, I don't want to hurt your feelings, Tuppy, but considering it un-English. A bit un-English, Tuppy, old man, you must admit." "I'm Scotch." "Really?" I said. "I never knew that before." Rummy how you don't suspect a man of being Scotch, unless he's Mac something and says, "Och, aye," and things like that. I wonder, I went on, feeling that an academic discussion on some neutral topic might ease the tension, if you can tell me something that has puzzled me a good deal. What exactly is that stuff they put in haggis? I've often wondered about that. From the fact that his only response to the question was to leap over the bench and make a grab at me, I gathered that his mind was not on haggis. "However," I said, leaping over the bench in my turn, "that is a side issue. If, to come back to it, you were in those bushes and heard what I was saying about you—" He began to move round the bench in a northeasterly direction. I followed his example, setting a course south-southwest. "No doubt you are surprised at the way I was talking." "Not a bit." "What? Did nothing strike you as odd in the tone of my remarks?" "It was just the sort of stuff I would have expected a treacherous, sneaking hound like you to say." "My dear chap," I protested, "this is not your usual form. A bit slow in the uptake, surely? I should have thought you would have spotted right away that it was all part of a well-laid plan." "I'll get you in a jiffy," said Tuppy, recovering his balance after a swift clutch at my neck. And so probable did this seem that I delayed no longer, but hastened to place all the facts before him. Speaking rapidly and keeping moving, I related my emotions on receipt of Aunt Dahlia's telegram, my instant rush to the scene of the disaster, my meditations in the car, and the eventual framing of this well-laid plan of mine. I spoke clearly and well, and it was with considerable concern, consequently, that I heard him observe, between clenched teeth which made it worse, that he didn't believe a damned word of it. "But, Tuppy," I said, "why not? To me the thing rings true to the last drop. What makes you skeptical? Confide in me, Tuppy." He halted and stood taking a breather. Tuppy, pungently, though Angela might have argued to the contrary, isn't really fat. During the winter months you will find him constantly booting the football with merry shouts, and in the summer the tennis racket is seldom out of his hand. But at the recently concluded evening meal, feeling, no doubt, that after that painful scene in the larder there was nothing to be gained by further abstinence, he had rather let himself go, as it were, made up leeway, and after really immersing himself in one of Anatole's dinners, a man of his sturdy build tends to lose elasticity a bit. During the exposition of my plans for his happiness, a certain animation had crept into his round and round the mulberry bush jamboree of ours, so much so, indeed, that for the last few minutes he might have been a rather oversized greyhound, and a somewhat slimmer electric hare doing their stuff on a circular track for the entertainment of the many-headed. This, it appeared, had taken it out of him a bit, and I was not displeased. I was feeling the strain myself, and welcomed a lull. "It absolutely beats me why you don't believe it," I said. "You know we've been pals for years. You must be aware that, except at the moment when you caused me to do a nose-dive into the drone's swimming bath, an incident which I'd long since decided to put out of my mind and let the dead past bury its dead about, if you follow what I mean, except on that one occasion, as I say, I have always regarded you with the utmost esteem. Why, then, if not for the motives I have outlined, should I knock you to Angela? Answer me that. Be very careful." "What do you mean, be very careful?" Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't quite know myself. It was what the magistrate had said to me on the occasion when I stood on the dock as Eustace Plimsoll of the Laburnums, and as it had impressed me a good deal at the time, I just bunged it in now by way of giving the conversation a tone. "All right, never mind about being careful then. Just answer me that question. Why, if I had not your interest sincerely at heart, should I have ticked you off as stated?" A sharp spasm shook him from base to apex. The beetle, which during the recent exchanges had been clinging to his head, hoping for the best, gave it up at this and resigned office. It shot off and was swallowed in the night. "Ah," I said, "your beetle," I explained. "No doubt you are unaware of it, but all this while there's been a beetle of sorts parked on the side of your head. You have now dislodged it." He snorted. "Beetles." "Not beetles, one beetle only." "I like your crust," cried Tuppy, vibrating like one of Gussie's newts during the courting season. "Talking of beetles, when all the time you know you're a treacherous, sneaking hound." It was a debatable point, of course, why treacherous, sneaking hounds should be considered ineligible to talk about beetles, and I dare say a good cross-examining counsel would have made quite a lot of it, but I let it go. "That's the second time you've called me that, and," I said firmly, "I insist on an explanation. I have told you that I have acted throughout from the best and kindliest motives in roasting you to Angela. It cut me to the quick to have to speak like that, and only the recollection of our lifelong friendship would have made me do it. And now you say you don't believe me, and call me names, for which I am not sure I couldn't have you up before a beacon jury, and mulct you in very substantial damages. I should have to consult my solicitor, of course, but it would surprise me very much if an action did not lie. Be reasonable, Tuppy. Suggest another motive I could have had, just one." "I will. Do you think I don't know? You're in love with Angela yourself." "What?" "And you knocked me in order to poison her mind against me and finally remove me from your path." I had never heard anything so absolutely loopy in my life. "Why, dash it, I've known Angela since she was so high. You don't fall in love with close relations you've known since they were so high. Besides, isn't there something in the book of rules about a man not marry his cousin? Or am I thinking of grandmothers?" "Tuppy, my dear old ass," I cried, "this is pure banana oil. You've come unscrewed." "Oh, yes? Me? In love with Angela? Ha, ha!" "You can't get out of it with ha-has. She called you darling." I know, and I disapproved. The habit of the younger G of scattering darlings about like birdseed is one that I deprecate. Lax is how I would describe it. "You tickled her ankles." "In a purely cousinly spirit. It didn't mean a thing. Why, dash it, you must know that in a deeper and truer sense I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole." "Oh, and why not? Not good enough for you?" "You misunderstand me," I hastened to reply. "When I say I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole, I intend merely to convey that my feelings towards her are those of a distant, though cordial, esteem. In other words, you may rest assured that between this young prune and myself there never has been, and never could be, any sentiment warmer and stronger than that of ordinary friendship." "I believe it was you who tipped her off that I was in the larder last night, so that she could find me there with that pie, thus damaging my prestige." "My dear Tuppy, a Wooster?" I was shocked. "You think a Wooster would do that?" He breathed heavily. "Listen," he said. "It's no good your standing there arguing. You can't get away from the facts. Somebody stole her from me at Cannes. You told me yourself that she was with you all the time at Cannes, and hardly saw anybody else. You gloated over the mixed bathing, and those moonlight walks you had together." "Not gloated, just mentioned them." "So now you understand why, as soon as I can get you clear of this damned bench, I am going to tear you limb from limb." "Why, they have these bally benches in gardens," said Tuppy discontentedly. "It's more than I can see. They only get in the way." He ceased, and, grabbing out, missed me by a hair's breadth. It was a moment for swift thinking, and it is at such moments, as I have already indicated, that Bertram Wooster is at his best. I suddenly remembered the recent misunderstanding with the Basset, and with a flash of clear vision saw that this was where it was going to come in handy. "You've got it all wrong, Tuppy," I said, moving to the left. "True, I saw a lot of Angela, but my dealings with her were on a basis from start to finish of the purest and most wholesome camaraderie. I can prove it. During that sojourn in Cannes, my affections were engaged elsewhere." "What?" "Engaged elsewhere, my affections, during that sojourn." I had struck the right note. He stopped sidling. His clutching hand fell to his side. "Is that true?" "Quite official." "Who was she?" "My dear Tuppy, Does one bandy a woman's name? One does if one doesn't want one's ruddy head pulled off. I saw that it was a special case. Madeleine Basset, I said. Who? Madeleine Basset. He seemed stunned. You stand there and tell me you were in love with that Basset disaster? I wouldn't call her that Basset disaster, Tuppy. Not respectful. Dash being respectful. I want the facts. You deliberately assert that you love that weird God help us? I don't see why you should call her a weird God help us either. A very charming and beautiful girl. Odd in some of her views, perhaps. One does not quite see eye to eye with her in the matter of stars and rabbits, but not a weird God help us. Anyway, you stick to it that you were in love with her? I do. It sounds thin to me, Wooster. Very thin. I saw that it would be necessary to apply the finishing touch. I must ask you to treat this as entirely confidential, Glossop, but I may as well inform you that it was not 24 hours since she turned me down. Turned you down? Like a bedspread, in this very garden. 24 hours. Call it 25. So you will readily see that I can't be the chap, if any, who stole Angela from you at Cannes. And I was on the brink of adding that I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole, when I remembered I had said it already, and it hadn't gone frightfully well. I desisted, therefore. My manly frankness seemed to be producing good results. The homicidal glare was dying out of Tuppy's eyes. He had the aspect of a hired assassin who had paused to think things over. I see, he said at length. All right, then. Sorry you were troubled. Don't mention it, old man, I responded courteously. For the first time since the bushes had begun to pour forth glossops, Bertram Wooster could be said to have breathed freely. I don't say I actually came out from behind the bench, but I did let go of it, and with something of the relief which those three chaps in the Old Testament must have experienced after sliding out of the burning fiery furnace, I even groped tentatively for my cigarette case. The next moment a sudden snort made me take my fingers off it as if it had bitten me. I was distressed to note in the old friend a return of the recent frenzy. What the hell did you mean by telling her that I used to be covered with ink when I was a kid? My dear Tuppy, I was almost finickingly careful about my personal cleanliness as a boy. You could have eaten your dinner off me. Quite, but... And all that stuff about having no soul? I'm crawling with soul, and being looked on as an outsider at the drones. But, my dear old chap, I explained that. It was all part of my ruse or scheme. It was it? Well, in the future, do me a favor and leave me out of your foul ruses. Just as you say, old boy. All right, then. That's understood. He relapsed into silence, standing with folded arms, staring before him rather like a strong, silent man in a novel, when he's just been given the bird by the girl and is thinking of looking in at the Rocky Mountains and bumping off a few bears. His manifest pippedness excited my compassion, and I ventured a kindly word. I don't suppose you know what au pied de la lettre means, Tuppy, but that's how I don't think you ought to take all that stuff Angela was saying just now too much. He seemed interested. What the devil, he asked, are you talking about? I saw that I should have to make myself clearer. Don't take all that guff of hers too literally, old man. You know what girls are like. I do, he said, with another snort that came straight up from his insteps, and I wish I'd never met one. I mean to say, it's obvious that she must have spotted you in those bushes and was simply talking to score off you. There you were, I mean, if you follow the psychology, and she saw you, and in that impulsive way girls have, she seized the opportunity of ribbing you a bit. Just told you a few home truths, I mean to say. Home truths? That's right. He snorted once more, causing me to feel rather like royalty receiving a 21-gun salute from the fleet. I can't remember ever having met a better right and left-hand snorter. What do you mean, home truths? I'm not fat. No. And what's wrong with the color of my hair? Quite in order, Tuppy, old man. The hair, I mean. And I'm not a bit thin on top. What the dickens are you grinning about? Not grinning, just smiling slightly. I was conjuring up a sort of vision, if you know what I mean, of you as seen through Angela's eyes. Fat in the middle and thin on top. Rather funny. You think it funny, do you? Not a bit. You'd better not. Quite. It seemed to me that the conversation was becoming difficult again. I wished it could be terminated. And so it was. For at this moment something came shimmering through the laurels in the quite even fall, and I perceived that it was Angela. She was looking sweet and saint-like, and she had a plate of sandwiches in her hand. Ham, I was to discover later. "If you see Mr. Glossop anywhere, Bertie," she said, her eyes resting dreamily on Tuppy's facade, "I wish you would give him these. I'm so afraid he may be hungry, poor fellow. It's nearly 10 o'clock, and he hasn't eaten a morsel since dinner. I'll just leave them on this bench." She pushed off, and it seemed to me that I might as well go with her. Nothing to keep me here, I mean. We moved towards the house, and presently from behind us there sounded on the night the splintering crash of a well-kicked plate of ham sandwiches, accompanied by the muffled oaths of a strong man in his wrath. "How still and peaceful everything is," said Angela. End of chapter 15.